This war is coming to an end, and the terms on which it is ending tell you everything you need to know about who won and who lost. Iran won this war. That is not a comfortable statement for Washington to make, but the facts on the ground leave very little room for an alternative interpretation. Iran entered this conflict not as the aggressor, but as the target of a surprise attack at a moment when it was actively negotiating a diplomatic resolution. 2 days before the bombs fell, Iran had agreed to a nuclear framework that would have resolved the central dispute. The war was launched anyway. And now, after tens of billions of dollars spent, after 39 days of intensive bombardment, after American destroyers were struck and retreated, after U.S. forces panicked and killed approximately 20 Iranian civilian fishermen believing their boats were fast attack craft, Washington is negotiating to get back to roughly where things stood before the war began. Secretary of State Rubio said precisely that in a press conference. The goal of negotiations is to return to the situation that existed before the war started, which raises the obvious question, why start the war at all? Let's talk about what actually happened operationally, because the official narrative being presented to the American public bears very little resemblance to reality. Defense Secretary Hegseth announced a tremendous victory over the Iranian Navy, claiming American forces had sunk Iranian vessels and successfully escorted commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz under a red, white, and blue protective dome. Secretary Rubio later had to acknowledge the truth. American forces sailing toward the strait were targeted by Iranian missiles and painted with target acquisition radar. U.S. forces panicked. In that panic, they fired on nearby civilian vessels, fishing boats, believing them to be Iranian fast attack craft. Missiles fired during the engagement went off course and struck a United Arab Emirates oil facility. The UAE, believing itself under Iranian attack, activated its own air defense systems and began firing at targets that did not exist. It was chaos driven by fear, not victory driven by capability. That is what happened in the Strait of Hormuz, not a dome. A panic. The Dark Eagle hypersonic missile has been presented as a game-changing weapon that will shift the entire balance of this conflict. The reality is that the United States has 8 of them. They cost $41 million each. They have never been tested against a hardened target. The Pentagon does not know how lethal the warhead actually is. If all 8 were fired, Iran would wait approximately 1 month for the 9th to come off the production line. This is the weapon being held up as Iran's greatest fear. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister traveled to Moscow, where he met with Vladimir Putin directly. Shortly after that meeting, Putin called Trump and spoke with him for 90 minutes. The readout from that call included a clear message from Moscow. If the United States or its allies resume kinetic operations against Iran, the economic consequences of Iran's retaliation would cause permanent damage to the global economy, including that of the United States. That call is a significant reason why Trump is now looking for an exit. Iran is also going to Beijing. The Iranian foreign minister's visit to China ahead of Trump's scheduled summit with Xi Jinping is not coincidental. China and Russia are both working diplomatically to give Trump a politically viable off-ramp, one that allows him to claim achievements domestically while Iran secures virtually everything it sought. Part of that arrangement reportedly involves Iran agreeing to transfer its 60% enriched uranium to Russia, a concession that gives Trump something to point to while leaving Iran's nuclear infrastructure and enrichment capability intact. The Strait of Hormuz is not going back to pre-war status either. Iran has formally established a Persian Gulf Strait Authority to permanently manage and control the waterway. It is in the process of legislating that control into law. The most likely resolution is that this becomes a joint Iranian-Omani authority. What does Iran gain from a deal? Economic liberation. When sanctions are lifted and Iran fully integrates into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, into BRICS, into regional economic frameworks, its economy is positioned for substantial growth. And the relationships it builds with China, Russia, and regional partners through this process will be so deeply interconnected that the United States will have no leverage to pull Iran back into isolation. Those relationships become Iran's long-term security guarantee, more reliable than any paper agreement with Washington, which Iran has learned through bitter experience can be cancelled by executive order on a president's first day in office. The irony of this entire conflict is that Iran, which never wanted this war and was attacked while negotiating in good faith, emerges from it stronger than it entered. With the Strait of Hormuz under its formal authority, its nuclear program intact, sanctions relief on the table, and its pivot toward the East now irreversible, the United States, which initiated the conflict on the assumption that Iran would collapse quickly, emerges with depleted weapons stockpiles, damaged naval assets, destroyed regional bases, and a deal that gives it less than it had before the first bomb fell. The war is ending, but the world it leaves behind has fundamentally changed.